All right. Good morning, man. It's another day. We're just about to get into our first morning session. And man, I just wanted to preface this video before I get started. I'm really motivated this morning. I just watched a Jim Rohn video. One of those motivational videos on YouTube, like get you motivated. And I want to preface my state of mind this morning and what I'm trying to do, and then just get into this session. And probably this session is going to say design the rest of the sessions that I have, and like how I work and navigate through all these other sessions. I have my other Bluetooth device on in the living room. So yesterday, first of all, the Jim Brown video says everything affects everything else, and every new discipline affects every other discipline that you have in your life. So when you start a new discipline, say a study discipline, it will affect another discipline that you have in your life, maybe journaling, or how you handle your money, or any other thing, your working out routine and everything. And I have come to really believe over the years that disciplined people go much further in life than undisciplined people. And I know this because I have had a season in my life where I was very undisciplined and I was just winging it. And this is not that anymore. This is now we're getting into discipline and winging it. Now, with that in mind, thinking of discipline and winging it and where my life is currently, one of the thoughts that I really wanted to come and explore today was this idea of so now what? How can I think about web development in a more conscious way and embed this into my everyday routine? I don't want to, and I know that. So the thing is, I have a lot of uh, bursts and stops, right? So I could have a sprint for a month where I'm really, really inspired and I would jump into this thing, and then the other new month, it would just be all downhill. But I don't want that with web technology, because at the same time I don't have so many years to learn this. I want to learn this very, very quickly, and I wanted to just come in and start talking about this. And so this is my notion in my web development um, page, and I figured I might start here and talk about my progress so far, probably, and then I might just get to jump in and maybe learn loops and play with loops. Okay. So 6 months ago, not 6 months, so it's September, so 9 months ago in January, I set out to learn web development after 10 years. Okay. And it was very interesting to me because I really wondered to myself, how can I do and what can I do to make myself really understand this? And so the first thing that I did is I got a roadmap, and this is the roadmap that I have tried to follow for the rest of the season. I got this roadmap from roadmap.sh, and I follow him on GitHub, and roughly it's been what I've been trying to follow. So ideally, I would so this is the back end. I have not yet gotten here to the back end, but ideally I would go through this front end program and learn HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And then after I've mastered JavaScript and I've mastered everything around HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, I would have probably mastered most of front end. Okay. And then after that, I would move to the back end. Right. And this is the framework that the roadmap that I've been following a bit. But as maybe I can confess, is I haven't been very, how can I say it, consistent with it, because now you see it's September and I'm wondering to myself, what can I really show for what I've done? This is another roadmap that I got from Web Dev Simplified, from his email list. He says how you need to go through HTML, then CSS, then JavaScript basics, and then like React and other stuff, right? But I haven't really like gotten into this, and this is just me keeping talking about. This was the back end, and I had started. So this is something I had started to do, okay? And I don't know where I got these things to write, but I learned the internet, I learned HTML, I learned CSS, floats, positioning, display, box models, CSS grid and flexbox, responsive design, media queries. I'm not sure if I really learned this. Then a bunch of CSS frameworks, then JavaScript, and this is where I am right now. I don't want to tick a lot of this. And see, so the thing is, even I haven't even come back to really like work on this. Can we go back here and talk through? So that said, with this roadmap, I started a new one to complement my roadmap. Well, this was to be my progress. Okay. Ideally, ideally, I would have a bunch of learnings in here and my progress, and technical actually essentially I had wanted to be able to gamify my skills and to be able just to like to write down what I learned and how I learned it. Okay, and that's why you'd see like here I am kind of doing the same thing that I had started in the other page, where I'm coming in and I'm writing about JavaScript value types and value operators, and I'd wanted also just come in and do these notes, as this is the skill set that I have. So this is pretty important to me. Okay. Now, and then this is like a knowledge base. This is a database of all my learning pulled from the internet. So this one here I had wanted to. So this is something I did in January when I just started. Actually, in February, just in the beginning of the month, but I never went back and did it. I was watching a bunch of YouTube videos in that season. I watched so many. I watched countless hours of YouTube videos just because I wanted to really understand the um, area, the geography of web development. I watched introductions. I watched what is CSS explained for beginners. What is CSS and how it works? What is HTML? And I remember really like just watching all these like basics videos, and then the rest. And as I kept evolving and I kept developing, I really just was watching a lot of introduction type videos. And so I had hoped to be able to document each and every video that I watched, but I just found out that that is almost impossible to. But don't know, maybe it could be done if I was very conscious. And then this could have been articles. Every time I read an article on Medium, I would probably come and put it in here. And then this is something I had wanted now, and probably this is what we're going to do today, or this is the thing that is on my mind a lot, and what I want to do, even like now for my new progress YouTube channel. Okay, so I wanted to have an ultimate progress tracker. Okay, so an annual calendar or a small blog or newsletters on progress made. Thing is, I want to really have a timetable of how I study now. I want to put in the time, Man, I was looking yesterday about studying, and I saw a bunch of people who study for hours per day, people who study for like uh, 8 hours every day. And I thought, why can't this also be my story with web development? I am in a season of life where I no longer want this to just be a thing that took a bunch of my time and I never got any result out of it. Like, there's no point of me really just diving into this thing this year and not seeing any result out of it. And so this morning I've been asking myself questions like, and this is the reason I wrote this yesterday evening. And I wrote, what is my study like? How far have I made it? And what timetable shall I stick to? Because, like I said, I honestly don't want to be one of those guys who poured years into this and actually got nothing out of it. And I also don't want to regret that I had the opportunity to really, really go hard and never actually went hard. So I want this to be a process of how I'm gonna think about these things. So one of the things that I noticed, and I'm going to launch this YouTube channel, and I'm going to go to my channel. This is my second channel where now I'm doing a bunch of these things. I'm just gonna talk a little bit about that. I want to so this is another thing that is helping me to really think through these ideas. I want to use this public video repository to help me to study and to help me to keep up with learning. I had decided after struggling for like 4 months, from maybe May, is when I must have started. So that's maybe 3 months. But from maybe May, I really tried to go through Eloquent JavaScript book, this free book, and it was so tough, man. I wondered to myself, why is this thing so tough? And I remember I got like in my head, it was so frustrating that I would be reading through this book and it would defeat me. It would legit defeat me. I would feel like my brain is frying. I can no longer put these concepts together. And it's just, man, I even told my wife it's so crazy when I start going through a look on JavaScript. I I fall, I become sleepy, and I can't do it anymore. And I remember her really, really laughing to that because it was very, very crazy. So I told myself, man, so I watched a YouTube channel, some YouTube channel. Somebody recommended something very simple. They said that if you want to learn development, what you want to do is you want to be an active learner. So you don't watch coding videos, you follow along to coding videos. And this is what I did. This is me following along to a coding video. And I also have a bunch of other on my desk, on my computer, that I haven't uploaded. I don't see myself uploading, though it was in the past. Maybe I could show, since this is a personal video, I could show this process. And it's just okay. So the process. All right. So I have a bunch of Camtasia recordings, and June 13 morning. So I started. This is something also that I started, and I felt a very big progress happening to me in my life because of this. And I told myself, wow, it's so crazy how this happened. And I'm going to try my very best to be doing this as a process of life and learning. And this is how I'm doing this. Another reason why I'm doing this is it helps me to keep time, and it helps me to understand how much time I have spent. It is like on learning, for example. So like I can know when I jumped into this, it was about an hour. This is a video I did um, back in June, and I'm just gonna mute it, and I'm going to scroll through, and you can see, all right, so here I installed GitHub, and so I was trying to really understand a code that I was following along on the internet, and it was so tough. And then I went and I was watching this YouTube video while I was trying to code along. This realization 2 months ago, it changed my life, because just doing this thing where I was coding along and following to the video, I found that I was really starting to understand how these things work, instead of watching, or instead of, say, like reading eloquent JavaScript. So I told myself, let me close this. When I get back to this, I'm going to always be an active learner. Always. So like, if talking to myself helps me make sense of this is what I'm going to do. If just reading through it is going to be tough, I'm not going to do that. All right. So here we are. And two things that I would like to, like work on, man. Two things. What I would like to really work on is a study routine. And I really wanted to be able to do that. Maybe I can take this all these like thoughts and notes and dump them into this page, and then maybe I can think through it here, but I don't know how this looks like yet. Okay, so what will be happening throughout this day, I really wish I had like a clear path to how you can do this. Well, I thought I can have a calendar database where I can use that to check off, and I can also use that to plan. But Notion only gives you about 3 calendar databases. I already have one. This is called my master project calendar, and I've actually never done anything in this. I just got so overwhelmed. I thought maybe I could also use a Google Cal, and I don't know, bro. I don't know. I don't know how to do this. So since I don't know, I'm just going to relax and maybe use the rest of my time to just jump into code again and to finish this. I just finished reading this yesterday. I'm about to upload it on the YouTube. This was so tough, but I had finished going through program structure. So I'm going back and I'm doing the story so far. And I think I'm also not going to proceed after here until I've already redone my revision so far. In fact, I was doing loops. Oh, this is another thing that I want to do also. I found is very interesting, something called launch code education. But I'm gonna talk about that right now. I was studying about loops, and you can see on my YouTube channel, I so I did this story so far, and when I was doing this, let me open my Notion here. Notion .so. I wonder which page it will open. It will open my let me just jump into JavaScript ES6. This is inside. This is why I love Notion so much, is because so this whole thing is inside a database, and inside this database I have a bunch of other databases. And let me just have a list view. Alright, so eloquent JavaScript ebook, and now this is a page inside a database inside another database. And I was going through this book, man, and I was really just revising and working through whatever I had learned, especially on on program structure. It was funny because I was having a very hard time, and I think I haven't mastered it, and that's what I wanted to come and finish, to do a bunch of questions. Let me just open it, and maybe we could finally finish working through loops, and then we can move on to working in functions. All right, so I managed. Oh, this I actually didn't do this. Interesting. So I had a few examples. I even have me starting to work on loops part one, and I ended up failing. Let's go to jsbin.com. This is where we're going to write our JavaScript code on the browser, because we don't want to. Let's open JavaScript. Let's go HTML. Let's open right. And so this is one of the things that I had wanted to do. For example, now how do you define interesting? How do you define this? Right. So here's an example problem that I was trying to get started on. Write a loop that makes 7 calls to the console.log to output the following triangle. 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. And this is how I'm choosing to start my beginner programming, is that I will always as a beginner always write down the steps you are going to take. So I said, first create a variable called I had called it triangle, and give it a value, a string value, hash. To create because so it's 7 calls, so you can create also a count variable and or counter, and give it a value number 7, and then step 3, create a for loop that iterates. Okay, create a for loop. How can I write about it? Where count starts at 1, stops if it's less than or equal to 7. No, 7, then iterate or add plus 1, and then in the loop, or step 4, in the for loop, I am going to tell you one of my problems in here and why this thing might have failed for me. Add Okay. Output the triangle value. Alright, so let's try that. So let's say let triangle be hash, step out of it. Let count be this is not supposed to be 3, it's supposed to be hash. Let count be 7. Okay, so our for loop 4 count is equal to 7. So we can't now define it here and say let count be 7. So we can just say when count is equals to 7 or 1, or let's start from 1. 1, but count is less than or equal to 7. That's our second condition. Count plus plus. Then pass in the following arguments. Triangle plus, I guess, this console.log. I hope this is how it will work. Triangle, triangle. Alright, so let's step out of that code and see. Unexpected assignment call. What do you mean? Run. Oh, okay. So this one was just it broke when I thought I get this. Okay. What happens when I remove this? So let's walk through our thinking. How about if I said count? You say triangle. How can I use the word return? Okay, I'm just messing because there's no reason why it should do this. Yeah, right? Let me delete that. So I had console.log count. Let's try that first. So this one, it iterates 1 to 7. So we know this will iterate 1 to 7. So let's say let's try this. I wonder what it will it concatenate? Nothing. That is not the thing. I got it last time, man. Okay, so let's use triangle here instead. But I wonder why we have no count. For let count be 7. I really like I feel a way when I don't remember whatever I did. So loops exercise 1. See, that is the reason why I don't want to move on to other things, because it's just, why does it take me such a long time to understand basics? Basics, bro. Why am I stuck? So write a loop that makes even call to the console loop. Hey, did you just hang on me? Okay, it may be useful to know that. So you can start a program that prints out the number 1 to 7, which I just did. Divide by making a few modifications to even number. Okay, this I just did, where a for loop was introduced. Now consider the equivalence between numbers and strings of hash characters. You can go from 1 to 2 by adding plus or equals to 1. You can go from hash to hash hash by adding plus or equals to hash. That situation can closely follow the number printing program. Alright. Should use So let me just see what I did here, because already we went through this thing, and this is what I did actually. Console.log, and I ended up actually trying to clean it up, but I got stuck the same place. Funny, huh? Yeah, this is exactly where I got stuck. Where I'm just getting stuck again here. Twice, bro. Got stuck twice. And I really want to understand, like, why have I failed, because I don't want to fail in further in other exercises. I want it to start at 1. Equals to okay. Bro, what just happened? Huh? 1 2 1 2 3. But how come this is so? What is this? Did you just double this? 1 2 3 4 5 6 7. How is it? Is taking 2, then taking this 2, adding 2. Bro, which type of loop is this? So this is it's doubling. It's always doubling. This is very unique. I've never seen anything like this. I think it's this is what defines that. Let's just say how about if we just closed it like this? But why? Yeah, I think there's something that I haven't understood about the idea of loops. The idea of a for loop. So let me go back and look at my notes. So this is a for loop. Actually, for you to understand a for loop, you want to understand a while loop, because a for loop is a better way of writing a while loop. So here's an example. Let number be 0 while number is less than 12. Console.log number. Okay, number is number plus 2. For loop. So yeah, so this is a short and slightly more comprehensive way to write and do a while loop. Inside a for loop, it has got to declare a variable before iteration. Okay, so for let number be 0, number is less than 12, number is equals to number plus 2, console.log number. So the parentheses after the keyword must contain 2 semicolons, this and this. These are my notes. The part before the first semicolon initializes the loop, usually by defining a binding. Okay, the second part of the expression checks whether the loop must continue, so it has to end at 12. And the final part updates the state loop after every iteration. Okay, so I have this in check. So in my code, I have defined this binding called this string called and those are I was reading some content. This one. Okay, so this was one of those things. Not this one. It was in not this one. Okay, fine. What was that page? Not launch code, not Avant Tutor. Ugh, can't believe I don't know why it was. This is shameful going through my my JavaScript tutorials, my history. I get to see how nasty I am. Not this one. I think this one. So this one, I was thinking a lot how to write these patterns in JavaScript. So let's bring this one here and maybe turn simple. And maybe we're going to open another JS bin here and really think through this logic, because this is free knowledge now. Okay, so let's think about a pattern that looks like what we're trying to do, like the right triangle pattern in JavaScript. So create a right triangle, again run two nested for loop. External loop will take care of the columns of pattern and the internal loop will print rows in the pattern. Let's think through this logic. Okay, so to create the right triangle pattern in JavaScript, again run two nested for loops. External loop will take care of the columns of the pattern and the external loop will print the patterns. So you can observe from the above shown pattern that we need to run an external loop for n time, while the internal loop runs for 1 time in the first execution, 2 times in the second execution, and so on till n times. So you can use the value I from the external loop, which increases 1 to n inside the loop condition. So let's look at whatever they did. Control C, and then just think through this logic. Okay, run. So interesting. This one still has like this thing. So first he has declared n is 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is his count. So let's rename it to let count be 5. Let's replace every n was with count. And let string to still be string. So let I should have been, so this is the internal loop. For I is 1 and I is less than count. Okay, so these are 2. Okay, fine. I plus plus. For this is another loop inside it. For let j be 0. Now what is j? This is creating a new loop inside this loop. String equals this. Okay, that is in that loop. How can I say it now? String console.log string. Let's think about this again. So he decided to have his count and to have his string. So this is open. You can also do this. You can say this is one string. Instead of triangle, let me have string, an empty string. And then it will be an empty string plus this. Okay. So he has defined 4. He has count, he has string, then he has I and j. Why does he have I and j? Because he initialized 2 loops. Why? So what does the external loop do, and what does this internal loop do? You can use the value of I from the external loop, which will increase 1 to n inside the loop as a condition. Okay, and let's look at this other one here. It has a bunch of comments. For let n be 5, let string be an empty string. For let I is going to be 1, but I is less than or equal to n, I plus plus. So I'm finding out that if you can define like if you can define something beforehand, you can use it in a logic inside a loop. Iterate on I. So that's going to print the spaces, and inside that have 2 1. So let's just try this. Let's go to his JS bin and replace star with hash. Okay, with hash, and let's replace his 5 with 7, and let's see what it will print. Okay, let's clear and then run it. Say 1 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 3 4. The problem is that now this string is inside a quote. What if we deleted this? Let's delete this. Let's clear. Let's run it. Okay. Interesting. String equals string plus this. But why? That's the reason. Why is it taking me so long to understand basics? Run it. It will give me this. Now, what is the difference between that and my code? So, what if I had another loop inside here? Right? So, let me just delete this first. And inside this loop, so this is the first loop, and then I can delete this first. Let's have another loop inside here. What will this other loop do? For let me create a new variable I. So this one is for, should just be the same, is equals to 1, is equals to I is less than or equal to 7, I plus plus triangle equals triangle let's clear this and run it. So what has happened is it has outputted 7 calls, 1 2 3 4 5 6 7, and added 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 10 11 12 13 14. Added a 7 extra ones. So this is 7 14 21, I guess. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 21, 28. This should teach me something about how this for loop works, but I can't seem to wrap my head around this logic. So let's say let's step out here and let's think on, let's think on paper. All right. What happened to this program? What do you see? Well, the triangle printed itself 7 times to the console log and doubles itself after every iteration. Why? Our count variable, so this is like an iteration inside an iteration. I think that's the mistake that I did. Like, this is a 4, so it's going to iterate here and give me 1. How can I make sense this? Bro, am I that silly? Am I really this stupid? For loops. Should I go with this? But yeah, Mosh teaches very nicely.
Sometimes we want to repeat an action a number of times. For example, let's imagine we want to display hello world 5 times on the console. The poor way of doing that is like this. So console.log hello world and then repeat it 5 times. This code is ugly. There is a better way to achieve the same result, and that's where we use loops. In JavaScript, we have various kinds of loops, and all these loops essentially do the same thing. They repeat an action a number of times. We have for loops, while loops, do while loops, for in loops, and for of loops. All these loops essentially do the same thing, but there is a subtle difference between how they start and end. Let's start by looking at the for loop. So back to this code. This is how we write a for loop. So for, we add parentheses. Now here we need 3 statements. The first statement is what we call the initial expression. And here we declare and initialize a variable. So we use let to declare a variable like I and set it to 0.
Loops.
Now I is short for index and is a common convention to use in for loops. This is what we call the loop variable. So we initialize it to 0, then we terminate this statement with a semicolon. Now the second part of the for loop is what we call a condition. So here we want to add a condition and compare the value of I with something else. This loop will run as long as this condition evaluates to true. So if we want this loop to run 5, declare and initialize a variable. So we use let to declare a variable like I and set it to 0. We add parentheses. Now here we need 3 statements. The first statement is what we call the initial expression. And here we declare and initialize a variable. So we use let to declare a variable like I and set it to 0. Now I is short for index and is a common convention to use in for loops. This is what we call the loop variable. So we initialize it to 0, then we terminate this statement with a semicolon. Now the second part of the for loop is what we call a condition. So here we want to add a condition and compare the value of I with something else. This loop will run as long as this condition evaluates to true. So if we want this loop to run 5 times, we compare I with 5. So as long as I is less than 5, this loop will execute. You will see that in a second. Once again, we terminate this statement with a semicolon. And finally, the third part. This is what we call increment expression. And quite often, what we have here is something like this. So we use the increment operator to increment the value of I with 1. Now, after this for statement, we can add one or more statements, just like the if statements. If you have multiple statements here, we need to put them in a code block like this. Now here we want to display hello world on the console. So our statement is console.log hello world. So instead of repeating this line 5 times, we put it in a for loop, and this loop will run 5 times. Now save the changes. So we get 5 hello world messages on the console. All right, now that you have seen a for loop in action, let's see exactly how this loop works. So earlier I told you this is what we call an initial expression. Here we're initializing I to 0. Now this loop will execute as long as this condition is true. So as long as I is less than 5, the statements we have here will be executed. Now, after the first iteration, I is incremented by 1. Then this condition is evaluated again. So 1 is less than 5. So one more time, this loop is executed. So we have the second iteration. Now after the second iteration, once again, I is incremented by 1. So now we are in the third iteration. Again, this condition is evaluated, and because it is true, the loop is executed. To show you this in action, I'm going to output I on the console. So save the changes. This is what we get. So note that in the first iteration, I is 0, then it's incremented by 1 until it reaches 4. So at the end of 5th iteration, I will be 4. And when we increment that by 1, it will be 5. So this condition will evaluate to false. So essentially, there are 2 ways to repeat an action a number of times using the for loop. Let's say we want to repeat something 5 times. We can initialize I to 0 and check to see if it's less than 5. Alternatively, we can initialize this to 1 and check to see if it's less than or equal to 5. Now, if we save the changes, you can see I starts from 1 and finishes at 5. Now, we can make this program a bit more interesting. Let's say we want to display the odd numbers between 1 to 5. So instead of logging hello world on the console, we can have an if statement and check the remainder of the division of I by 2. So if the remainder of division of I by 2 is not 0, that means I is an odd number. So we can display it on the console. Save the changes. So here are the odd numbers between 1 to 5. There is also another way to write this loop. Instead of starting from 1 and going all the way up to 5, we can start from 5 and go back to 1. So we change the initial expression, set I to 5. As long as I is greater than or equal to 1, now we want to decrement I. Save the changes. Now we get the odd numbers in the reverse order. Now it's more common to use the previous form, so we initialize I to 0 or 1 and increment it in every iteration. But in certain problems, you want to use a for loop in the reverse order. Hi guys.
Alright, so I don't see like how I've done something wrong. I think I've just
in JavaScript is called a for loop because it runs for a specific number of times. Here's the structure of the for loop. You always start with the word for, and then you're going to have something in these parentheses. You usually have 3 items. There's the initialization, and then you put a semicolon. Then you have the condition, and then a semicolon, and then the final expression. And then whatever's going to run in the for loop would be in these curly braces over here. Now all of these things are optional, but you have them in most for loops. The initialization is run just once to set up the loop variable. And every time the loop is run, the condition statement is evaluated at the beginning. The loop keeps going until the condition is false. And then the final expression is evaluated at the end of each loop iteration and is usually used to increment or decrement your loop counter. Let me give you an example of this. So in this example, first, outside of the for loop, we're going to create an array called rArray and set it to an empty array. Now we have the for loop. This is the initialization. We are going to create the variable I and set that I equal to 0. Now here's the condition. I is less than 5. So we are going to keep running the for loop while I is less than 5. So as long as I is less than 5, we'll continue running this for loop. At the end of each run of the loop, we are going to increment I plus plus just means we're going to add 1 to I. So it's going to go through the loop the first time. It's going to run this code within the brackets, and it's going to push I onto the array. And remember, I starts off with at 0. It's going to push 0 onto the array. And then it's going to increment I. Remember, it does this at the end. So now I is 1. It's going to go through. It's going to push 1 onto the array. It's going to go through, push 2, push 3, push 4. After 4, we'll increment I to 5. Before the for loop goes, it's going to check, is I less than 5? No, I is actually 5. I is not less than 5. So it's only going to push the numbers 0 through 4 onto the array. Let's check that out by console.logging it. So yeah, we got the array 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. You can also use a break statement to break out of a loop early. So now I have if I is more than 2, break. So if we run that, it's just going to put 0, 1, 2, because after 2, I is more than 2, so it breaks out of the loop, and then we're done with the loop. Now it's also common for loops to iterate through an array. So if an array already exists and has some items in it, we can loop through and console.log or print out each item in that array. So we're going to initialize I to equal 0 if I is less than r.length. So that's the array, and length is the length of the array. So if I is less than the length of the array, we're going to continue going through the array. So once we get to the end of the array, we'll be done with the for loop. At the end, we're going to increment I by 1, and we're just going to console.log r, and then we just put the I variable as the index that of the array that we're trying to console.log. So first we're going to get the array index 0 because I will equal 0, and index 0 will be 10. Then we'll do index 1, 2, 3, 4, because each run through the array we're going to increment I up 1, and that's going to go to the next index of the array. If we run that, see, we got 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. If you have a multi-dimensional array, you can use nested for loops to loop through both the array and any sub-arrays. Let me show you an example of that. Okay, so let's look at this. We have this array variable, which is a nested array. So there's one array, There's the beginning of the array and there's the end of the array. And inside the array are 3 other arrays. So inside the first array, here's index 0, here's index 1, here's index 2. And in each of those indexes is another array. So we have index 0 and index 1 in each array. So you can use nested for loops to loop through these both arrays. Here's our first for loop. Here's the end of that. And then here's our nested for loop. So we're going to initialize I to 0. If I is less than array.length, and the length of the array...
Why did he nest another for loop inside this for loop?
See, we have 1, 2, 3. So the length of the array is 3. But now inside the nested for loop, we have to initialize the variable differently. So now instead of I, we have j. Now j is less than array index I dot length. When we're looking at the array index I dot length, that's the first item in the array, which is the first array within the array. So now the length of this is just 2. We have 1, 2. So we're gonna increment j. So we're gonna run through this first for loop, and inside the first for loop, we're basically gonna go into the first array. And now we're gonna console.log each item in the first array. We're going to array index I, index j. So the first index is what index in this first array, which would be, if we're going to index 0, that's this, and then the index j will be what index in the second array, in the nested array. So we would get index 0, index 1 for j. It's going to go through this inner for loop to get both indexes in the first array. Then it's going to go back to the outer for loop to bump up to this next array. And then we're going to go through the inner...
That part just threw me off again. The nested for loop.
For loop again to get both indexes in here, and so on. If we console.log that, it's going to say 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the first 10, 9, 8, 7, 6 was from up here, and then we have the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 from down here. Well, those are for loops and nested for loops. Thanks for...
Alright, nested loops. There's no reason why I should nested for loop. So nested loops is a loop that is present inside another loop. JavaScript supports the nested loop in JavaScript. The loop can have one or more, or simple can have any number of loops defined inside another loop, and also can behave n level of nesting inside the loop. The nested loop is also called as an inner loop, and the loop in which the nested loop defined is an outer loop. The outer loop always executes first, and the inner loop executes. The inner loop executes each time the outer loop executes once. In the case of multi-level nested, this is why I was I wondered so much what's happening here. In the case of a multi-level nested, an outer loop executes first, then the first inner loop executes, and then the second inner loop executes, and so on. Any type of loop that can define inside. So what happened here, it's the first loop executed first, then the second loop executed, then this becomes now the original loop. It executes first, then the second loop executes, then this becomes the loop. It executes first, then the second loop executes, and it just keeps growing like that. And so the syntax of the nested loop in JavaScript is outer loop, inner loop statements, right? An outer loop and an inner loop are the loops that can be any type of loop, like for loop, while loop, and do while loop. So flowchart for the nested loop. Okay. Explanation to the above diagram. An above image shows flow. Let me get this too, just so that it can make sense. It shows as an image, we can clearly see that the outer loop first evaluates. If it's true, then evaluates. After the execution, the inner body again, it goes back to outer loop. So initialization false, and but it increases or decreases. True, condition 2 statements. Example 1. Do I have the energy to read this entire thing? Anyway. So as you can see, I'm really just like still stuck on on loops, man. It's very interesting to me how it, such a small thing can get me stuck. But I have to prepare for church, and I'll be back in the afternoon to after church to continue with in this. All right. I might also attach my old loops video I failed to this, so it's gonna come right up, and I'm gonna attach it to this. Right, let's go.